Welcome to another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce Book Club. I'm your host, Stephanie Dobson. I'm the founder, content creator, and CEO of Up a Notch Learning, Inc. And I'm pleased to have you join us today for our book club, which highlights amazing finds of positive and constructive books relating to separation and divorce, which can help families build skills and gain tools on your quest to becoming a healthy, thriving family after divorce. Today, we are featuring Home Will Never Be the Same Again, written by Carol Hughes and Bruce Fredenburg, both of whom join me today. Dr. Carol Hughes and Bruce Fredenburg have since the early 1980s both been California licensed marriage and family therapists who practice in Laguna Hills, California. Welcome, Carol and Bruce.
Thanks, Stephanie, for having us. We're happy to be here.
Thank you. So we'll be talking today about the book that you co-authored, which is a guide for adult children of gray divorce. So let's get started by talking about what is gray divorce and how prevalent is it these days?
Okay, I'll start and then Bruce is going to add some things to that. Gray divorce, the term was coined actually by the researchers at Bowling Green State University who started researching gray divorce. Well, they started researching United States Census, but it is a condition, no, that's not the right word, a phenomenon that is existing in all the industrialized countries in the world. And we'll talk about Canada in a little bit too. And so they started researching the US Census from 1990 to 2015. And what they discovered in that 25-year period is that the divorce rate among couples who are ages 50 and older, 50 and older, had doubled during that 25-year period, while the divorce rate in all the other age groups was declining. And then they looked at the ages 65 and older in that same time frame, and their divorce rate during that 25 years had tripled. And using their analytics going forward from 2015, they are predicting that the divorce rate in that gray divorce group for 50 and older, 65 and older also, will triple by the year 2030.
Wow.
Which is huge. And it's happening all over the world. We don't have the statistics from other countries, but we know that it's definitely a phenomenon that's increasing. There's writing about that. And then Bruce, you were going to add something, I think, to what I just shared.
Well, they have different names for it in other countries. For example, in Great Britain, they call them silver splitters. We heard from some attorneys in Toronto that they call it diamond divorcees. I don't know how common that is in Canada, but it's common in one attorney's office. I forget what the Australians call it, but they're having the same phenomenon. But we think the Japanese may have nailed it. They call it retired husband syndrome. And women always laugh when I say that for some reason.
Oh, no, I'm not laughing.
It goes over my head, but Carol chuckles.
I do, yes. Yes, and then every year in the United States, the census shows that about 600,000 couple or individuals divorce. And the statistics are on average that these couples, which is 300,000 couples, have 1 to 2 children. So if you multiply that, just in the United States, every year, divorce affects 1.2 million people in the United States in the gray divorce area. And that means they have adult children as well, which is what, as you said earlier, that we were writing about the parents and about the parents who have adult children. Oh, and the research about adult children is 18 to 50 plus years old. So it's a broad, a sweat of children who are, quote, adults, some more than others. Of course, 18-year-olds are not very adult-like. Of course, we know that from having been 18 ourselves, right?
And also, it affects people, and most people don't even know it affects the children growing up. I mean, the adult children. Most of the time, they're not just an underserved population, but an unserved population. And we'll get into later some of the reasons. But people just think it's something they should just get over. You're lucky they didn't get divorced when you were a kid, and are you still crying about that? Or some maybe snarky thoughts if they don't say it out loud, and then it causes people to start doubting themselves. But if you think of it, the 1.2 million people that are going into it this year, since they don't get much help, are likely to suffer next year. The ones from last year and the year before are still suffering. And is looking into the problem, which we started to outline in the beginning of the book so people would get it. It's, oh yeah, I mean, the water's wet. Of course it's hurting them. Why would you think it wouldn't?
And it's interesting because as a divorce professional myself, I often have couples who have adult children who come in to meet with me with respect to their separation and divorce. And often the first thing that I always talk about the children first. How are your children doing? And when there are children who are only over the age of 18, typically the response is, oh, they're fine. There's no issues with respect to the children because they're over the age of 18. And typically they're talking about, there's no child support related issues. They're self-sufficient or what have you. And there's no parenting scheduling that we need to do because they're on their own or they're 18 and they can figure it out on their own. And there's so many things that are missing from that. And that's why I'm so thankful to see a book like this that's designed to help adult children of gray divorce with the issues that are going on and to really normalize the situation.
And to help the parents, because they've been drinking the Kool-Aid too of the mythology in our cultures that if they're 18 or older, it doesn't affect them, which is absolutely not true.
Yeah. Can you explain the importance of parents turning their minds to these kind of issues with respect to their adult children? And why do we seem to dismiss or overlook these issues with respect to adult children of gray divorce?
Sure. Well, one thing, the legal system, most legal jurisdictions, I know on this continent, when children are looked at as adults at 18, and I don't think your kids are that old, Stephanie, but when they get there and you're writing checks for their college tuition or helping them make their car payment, they're not going to feel like adults to you. And although they're going to be screaming that they are. And so, it's not a monolithic group. But it's very seductive for a parent, as you know, if somebody in authority, like an attorney or somebody else, says the kids are going to be okay. Well, if I'm caught up in my own pain of the divorce or my fears or my anxiety of how am I going to get out of this, it's a relief for somebody to say the kids are going to be okay. Great. That's one less thing for me to worry about. And because of their own feelings of even if the person who initiated the divorce can have fear about the outcome and maybe some regrets or what's going to happen during the process. And, that's enough to occupy most people's minds so that they can't sleep at night. So when somebody says the kids are fine, good, one less thing.
And what you're describing in your book is it's not fine, and it's so important, and even if it's not right in the initial stages of divorce, if the parents are too caught up in their own emotions, I know from reading your book that some of the adult children of gray divorce who have come in to meet with you come in 2 and 3 years later after their parents' divorce, saying, is described in your book, that I can't figure out why I'm still having these issues. I mean, it's 2 and 3 years after my parents' divorce, and I feel so many things.
Yes, very common. And we started to notice that pattern in our practices for the last several decades. And we work in, part of our work besides being therapists is we work in collaborative divorce and mediation teams, professional teams, helping parents go through the divorce process in an out-of-court, respectful, dignified way. And some of our attorneys really embraced the idea early on that these adult children were stakeholders. It's a word that we learned from one of the attorneys in their divorce, in the parents' divorce. And the more we were looking at it through that lens, we saw that as well. And then we're able to also find some research, a little bit, there's not much, because of that mythology that they're fine. That's not a population you would need to research, right? So it's another reason we wanted to get the book out there to help the adult children and the parents and professionals who work with these families.
Mhm.
Stephanie, oh, that gives me a perfect opportunity. I like to tell the story of how this book came about because it wasn't what we imagined would be our first book, because we have a number of books that are not complete in our computers. And we're always saying, you know, we got to finish this and get it out. Well, let's make it this one. Let's make it that one. But a few years ago, I guess about 2016, maybe 15, but 16, Carol was thinking about that and adults as stakeholders and one of her clients, as we do when they come in within that situation. And she wrote a blog article for people practicing in our area, just a small blog about adult children being stakeholders in their parents' divorce and what a mistake it is for the professionals to overlook that as well as the parents. And as it turned out, some months later, a reporter for the New York Times was researching the Great Divorce. And so she came across Carol's blog. It's just everything stays alive in the internet. And so after she read it, she called Carol up and asked if she would be interviewed for the Times. And Carol said yes, and she got interviewed. And then a few months, I think, later, a literary agent for one of the big literary houses in New York City, it being the New York Times, of course, when they research, they're going to find that. And she was thinking about it and it resonated with her life. And so she called Carol and asked if she'd be willing to write a book about this. And Carol and I have been friends since graduate school, and we even have a suite together and we consult with each other on cases. So she asked me if I would be willing to write the book with her. And I said yes, not under, well, Carol says yes to a lot of the things because she knows opportunity when she hears it. I said yes because it's Carol. And I had no idea I was signing on to a 4-year journey of research and writing and rewriting and delays with COVID. And both of our homes, when we visit each other, the dining room tables are piled and, you know, full of things that our spouses are wishing weren't there. And they just, you know, left us alone, sort of, about the messes, because Carol's very organized and it was comforting for me to see her house a mess too. And, you know, we just had all these articles and books to read and reread and rewrite. 4 years later, it emerged.
Mhm. You know, I'm so glad that you've told that story because through doing this project of this Up a Notch Learning Book Club, I've met so many authors, and each one of them that I interview, I always talk to them about their story. And that's, to be honest, that's one of the my favorite parts of every book when I read it now, is to learn about the author's story. And so when I read that in your book, some parts of it, and you were able to expand on it here, I just love hearing that story.
Yeah, it's almost like a meant to be, you know? So
Yeah.
never intended to write a book about this, but once we got more into it, it was like, wow, this really needs to be told, you know, these adult children and their parents, because the parents don't know either what they don't know, you know? So it's to help all of them.
So we structured the book at the beginning to lay out the problem because most people don't even know that it's a problem. But we didn't want it to just be, well, here's a problem, have a nice life, or discourage people from continuing to read. So we structured tips and examples and strategies for avoiding the worst mistakes and also for healing afterwards. And then also included some relevant stories from real life in the book.
Mm-hmm. You have a whole chapter on helping parents of gray divorce on how they can help their adult children to cope. Can you give our viewers some of these tips?
Sure. So first of all, what we know from the research in the mental health field is that simply listening deeply, without judgment, without defensiveness, without trying to explain your position, talk the person who's sharing with you what they're feeling and experiencing out of what they're saying they're feeling and experiencing, is a fundamental part of the healing process. So number one, parents can listen deeply and try to embrace the idea that our culture has this mythology that because they're adults, they're going to be fine, or they are fine. I don't know about you, Stephanie. I'm guessing I know your answer. I have yet to meet an adult, obviously they're all adults going through divorce, who didn't have some negative, painful feelings, even if they're the one who wanted the divorce, because there's loss involved. So why wouldn't their adult children have some of these same feelings? So that's a really important concept to remember. Second of all, it's tempting for parents to use their adult children as their confidants, their peer. We've even heard stories of them asking their adult children to go on dates with them, go to clubs because they haven't been dating for decades. And that's not a good thing, because just as minor children don't like being in the middle and don't feel like they're trying to form an alliance with one parent versus the other parent, adult children don't like that either. So remember, parents, that your adult children have the right to have whatever relationship they want with both parents, and love them because they are their parents. And don't try to badmouth the other parent, to your adult child, and realize what stage of development your adult children are in, because there are different stages. The younger children who are just going into college, as you were alluding to earlier, Bruce, writing the check for tuition, a lot of them are still very financially dependent on their parents. And so they're afraid they might lose their college, their trade school training, whatever it is that their parents might be helping them with. Whereas the more middle-aged children, adult children, have their own careers. Sometimes they have their own family, their own children, and they're feeling like they've got to take care of their family, but also they worry about their parents. And if it's an older adult child and the parents are older, then maybe infirm, they've got all of those worries. So to be aware, parents, of what your adult children are going through in their life, as I was saying. And so about not using your children as your therapist or your counselor or your dating buddy, get into your own help, maybe with some of your programs, Stephanie, or see a therapist or a clergy person, so that you do your own work separate from your adult child, because they're still always your child, even though they're adults. Bruce, do you have some things to add to that? Oops, I think you lost your volume.
Yeah. Anyways, if people, when they're in that state and they're, trying to get into dating and they're trying to sort out their life, they forget what should be obvious. Your adult children don't want to hear about your sex practices or your ex-spouse's disappointments in you, or your disappointments or their financial foibles. I mean, that's really, it feels creepy to some of them, and it just feels like really disappointing, and don't drag me into this. And it's really important for parents to help avoid family infighting that happens so often. Like typically with the spouse's own personal kin, their brothers and sisters or their parents will take up their child's part of the fight and invite the adult children into bad-mouthing the other parent conversations, which puts them in a very painful, awkward position. Or if they do get sucked into that, it makes the healing really hard after a while. Going forward, families want to heal. And at the end of the day, despite all the maneuvers that go on around money and property and who did what to who, what most people are going to experience later on is, am I having a bad relationship with my children now? I mean, that's you're a parent. You can imagine how horrible that would be and full of regrets. Probably for most people, the most important thing that's going to matter in their life going forward was completely overlooked during the middle of the fighting. So parents could be proactive by going to their own brothers and sisters, who are the aunts and uncles of their children, and to their parents, the grandparents, and tell them they don't want their children to be involved in this fight. This is our divorce. It's not about the kids, it's about our adult relationship. And we don't want anybody to encourage or even allow our children to be sucked into these fights, because it's going to be a problem later on.
Mhm. The two things have dawned on me that would be great resources for our viewers in our e-learning portal. One is we've got one part of our interview series with Nancy Smith, and she's an attorney out of Virginia, US, and she talks about creating a divorce narrative and the importance of that, where a separating couple will be able to create their story for how they want their themselves and their family to perceive the divorce and the story that they want to create and that they want to tell the world about their divorce. And something like that can unify a family so that there isn't that infighting. Because Bruce, as you said, at the very end of the day, once the dust has settled, it's not if there will be resolution, there will be resolution. The question is, how nasty will it get? How much will it cost? And how long will it take? But at the end of the day, there will be resolution. The dust will settle. And at the end, you have your family relationships. And that's what's left. And I can tell you that what really struck me in one of the chapters that really struck me was about sibling relationships and family relationships in the book, and how that can be impacted, and where, you know, personalities come into play so often, where one of the adult children, if there's siblings, one adult child will have less anger or less emotions, or not want to side with someone, and another one of the adult children, another sibling, might say, I am siding with mom, or I'm siding with dad. And how could you talk to the other person and try to sort of increase that conflict in the infighting? And that is such a loss in and of itself, that not only are the parents separating, but now there's the infighting amongst the siblings. And that was a really impactful part of the book for me.
Well, you stated that so well. You described it. I wish I described it that well.
I read the whole book. It was an amazing book, right from start to finish.
It's one of the things that people can relate to, and we put it this way, is that life is primarily an emotional experience. Now, the three of us obviously valued the intellect because we went to school for a long time, but ultimately it's all emotion. And if I play a song on the radio that reminds you of being 15 years old, I can guarantee your first thought will not be conjugating French verbs or quadratic equations. And yet there was a time when you spent a lot of hours mastering those skills that you might barely remember. But the song on the radio will take you right back to how you felt about yourself at 15, who liked you, in my case, who I wanted to like me but didn't, all that sort of stuff going on. And so that's what I mean by later on with their family. It's that emotional cost, or not, depending on how they did it, that's going to play the biggest role in how disappointing their life going forward might become.
Right. And Stephanie, you mentioned the divorce narrative. We call it a divorce story, same thing. And we invite parents to think about, what is the legacy that you're leaving your children, minor and adult children, right now during these early stages of the divorce. And as you said, there is always resolution eventually. And so what is that legacy? Is it 1 to 3 to 5 to 10 years of fighting and the siblings not getting along, as you were saying, and we shared in the book? Or is it that you chose a respectful, dignified, peaceful process where it minimized the emotional and financial damage to the family, and all the family and the extended family and the community members? People have lost their places of worship because of divorce, because they don't want them to be there because they don't believe in divorce, as an extreme example. So take charge of what you can take charge of. Family relationships are for life, from the cradle to the grave. They are there, whether it's a positive relationship or a negative or neutral. They're always there. If we have a negative relationship, it doesn't mean it's not a relationship. So think of the legacy. What do you want your children, minor and adult, to remember about this time in their lives and going forward? What are you teaching them about resolving disputes and conflict? Bruce?
Yeah, big question that comes up for adult children that I don't think the co-parents think of at all. How are you guys, when you guys work this out, what do you want to have happen at high school graduations, or birthdays or weddings, do you guys want to show up and make it a drama, or do you want your children to decide who gets to come to what and when they get to come? And what part of the celebration do you get to participate in, because you guys can't be in the same room? And that gets people to thinking about, they haven't thought about that, but that's a big part of it for people.
Mhm.
Because most children, minor and adult, the number one question that we ask and that they answer almost always the same way is, how could your parents make this time in your life and going forward better for you? Almost 100% say, get along, stop fighting.
Mhm, mhm. And often so much of their life leading up to that, if they had been in the house recently or they've experienced their parents being together recently, a lot of leading up to a separation and divorce is conflict. And so by
Right.
the time the parents decide to separate, so often that's where, as you described, Carol, that the children say, okay, enough already. It's been there, done that. Let's move
Right.
forward in a more
Right.
positive way and stop
Yes.
the arguing.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And preserve the concept of family. The parents aren't still together, but everybody is still family. And for grandparents to lose contact with grandchildren or aunts and uncles or siblings, I mean, it's just isn't healthy. And so that's what the divorce narrative or the divorce story can do if we can focus parents on that at some point along the process. In the beginning, sometimes it's too soon in the beginning of the divorce, but we need to ask that question of them to get them thinking about the family concept.
Mhm.
And even you've probably come across this in your own practice, Stephanie, where maybe the non-related spouse of the adult child is just tired of the parents showing up and making a drama of their own children's birthdays or graduations, and they just decide, no, they just don't get to come anymore. And
Mhm.
that's a horrible thing for families to go through.
So when you say non-related spouse, Bruce, you're talking about like a daughter-in-law
Right,
or a
right. A daughter,
son-in-law. Yeah, to be clear.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Mhm. Well, and we've been talking about it all along, but let's talk more specifically even about the unique challenges that adult children of gray divorce have as compared with children under the age of 18 who are experiencing their parents' divorce.
Well, as Carol mentioned earlier, there's these different stages of development. So for the adult children, they've been living with the rituals and the traditions of this family for their whole life, so much longer than a minor child.
Mhm.
And because they're the ones who are adults, they suddenly can become in charge of, how many Thanksgiving dinners, how many celebrations, who comes to what. And so they have to manage that part of life on top of the rest of the stuff that they're trying to manage. And Carol mentioned the younger children who are in college and have to actually question, are my parents still going to support me? And most young children don't have to think about that. And then if you're a much older adult child, you may have a parent who doesn't feel they could ever re-enter the workforce, doesn't understand the family's money, and is going to need some financial help. And that's going to come out of their nuclear family. And if they need emotional help, that's going to be a problem. Or there was a Canadian publication asked us to write an article in Caregiver magazine, I think it was, but I hadn't thought of it because I hadn't come across it. But what happens when one of the divorcing people is the main caregiver of the other one who's infirm? And how that burden's going to fall to the older children to take care of, and how that's going to complicate their life and can create resentment towards the one, even if they can sympathize, they're going to resent the one who is leaving, or they might resent the parent for even being infirm. But those are things that typically don't happen to minor children, but it often requires not just the shift in thinking, but sometimes the shift in how you spend your time and how you spend your finances for the adult children that they weren't expecting at this time of their life.
Mhm. Yeah, that's it. There's so many things that, circling back to the original conversation, the original part of this conversation, when I first meet with clients and separating clients, and they say, the children are over the age of 18. There's no issues as they describe it. How wrong they are that there are no issues. And you've put it very plainly that there are issues, and it depends on their age and stage of development and adulthood and their stage of life and self-sufficiency, financial self-sufficiency will determine the kinds of issues that there are.
Mhm. Another question that adult children often find themselves asking is, that saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They start questioning at all ages, 18 and on up, will I be that apple? Will I not be able to sustain a long-term relationship? And that can cause ripples through the relationship they're in, be it a, long-term relationship in college or later in life, married. And often adult children don't know how to differentiate. Is this an issue that I'm taking on because my parents are going through divorce? Or is this an issue that really is about me, that I didn't learn how to have a healthy relationship? But we don't want them to throw out their marriage because of not being able to differentiate between those two concepts. So it's really good to at least talk to a professional for the adult children at all ages. And even they find that their friendships get destroyed or become really rocky, because sometimes their self-concept, adult children's self-concept, is being challenged, in their own psyche. So work with a professional, clergy, or licensed mental health professionals to help you as an adult child sort out what is it that is causing this trouble for you and trouble in your relationships. So that's a common pattern that we see as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you described earlier that you've worked for long time with families going through separation and divorce, and especially you've got a long experience helping adult children of gray divorce. And I would presume that you see patterns as to when these adult children of gray divorce first present to you in your office. In your book, you talk about them feeling a sense of loss of family, disbelief, shock, a whole host of other feelings, even you used the word crazy, feeling crazy. And I would, crazy, yes. And I would,
they say, yeah.
it's what they say, it's how they describe it. And of course, what they'll be feeling will probably depend a lot on how long it's been since the separation has occurred and the stage of and the nastiness between their parents. But I would really appreciate hearing and having our viewers hear about what your experience has been meeting and seeing these people. The stories in the book are so impactful, hearing that firsthand.
Yes. Well, you enumerated a lot of the feelings right there, Stephanie. They report coming, and sometimes it's their spouse, a friend, other family member that says, I want you to go talk to somebody, a professional, because you aren't yourself. You seem depressed, you seemed anxious, you're drinking too much, you're arguing with the kids, if they have kids. You just don't seem yourself, and you're sleeping too much, you're not sleeping enough, eating too much, not eating. And so they present all of those symptoms. They don't know that they could be symptoms of all that we've been talking about here, is that it's their shock and fear and anger and sadness at their family breaking apart. Even if the parents argued and they kind of always thought the parents might get divorced, it's still the finality of that, what they've lived with their whole lives. As Bruce said, some 20, 30, 40 years, 50-year-olds, even 60-year-olds we've met with, and other divorce professionals tell us, who are the adult children. So they start to really have these kind of symptoms that they need to realize probably are their reaction to dealing with this huge crisis in their family of origin. So that's one pattern for sure. And they do present saying, I feel like I'm crazy. I'm having trouble with my friends. What's wrong with me? And people are so happy to tell them there's something wrong with them, because they believe the mythology that they shouldn't be struggling with it. So that's one pattern that we see, and that the research absolutely supports, is those feelings, as I said.
That's what I was thinking about while you were talking, are the ones who, because they're isolated, because the cultural myth is that you're an adult, so they even feel kind of ashamed to to share that they're having this anxiety, and they look for other reasons, and they can't go to the people maybe they used to go to for guidance, which is their parents. You know, how do you deal with this? Because that's really the whole thing, and so they start thinking it's all me. It's something wrong with me.
Or
Or
their
my
peers.
family.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bruce, go ahead.
That's it. Or my family, they think. Go ahead, Karen.
Right. Or their peers tell them, they're 40-year-old males, and they're trying to be brave enough to talk. And the 40-year-old male or female says, "What are you talking about? Aren't you glad that you weren't 6 when they divorced? Come on, man up or woman up," right? Because those friends are ignorant about the issue as well and believe the mythology. So yeah, it's definitely a pattern. I would say that's the most common pattern.
Yeah, the isolation and the shame and the anxiety that's under it all.
I just thought of another thing, as in my experience as a divorce professional, so often I hear as well, we stayed together until the children were out of the house. We stayed together for the sake of the children, and which means possibly if they're in my office, they're separate, they've decided to separate or divorce. And so now they think that it's an appropriate time because they've now finished raising the children and they're off on their merry way. And so it's a great time to divorce. And one of the things that I've learned over time is, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it, is that it can be even more difficult for adult children of divorce to have their parent. It's different. It's perhaps not more difficult, but it's just so different because now they're 20 something, for example, and for the first time they're looking to, at Christmas time, they're on their break, or summertime, they're on their break from college, and they're looking to come back to their family home. And possibly their parents have now, with the split, they've maybe moved homes, their family home has been sold. And so their safety net, shall we call it, it is so different, and they've lost that sense of family and security, and they don't, as opposed to if their parents had separated when they were younger, the kids would have learned to live in both homes, and that would have been their home to come home to.
It's as you were saying that, I'm thinking it happens to younger children too, but as an adult, when I share this, you would maybe have a hard time dealing with it too, but from a different perspective. Like, your parents are arriving today, you mentioned that, and if your parents were divorced and one of them was bringing their new sweetie to introduce to you and the kids and your husband, your feelings about that might be, this is not what I want, or this is not what I'm not happy about it. Maybe you're happy, be happy, but don't bother my family with it. Mm-hmm. And as an adult, you can kind of get away from it, but then you have to make that decision. Now I'm barring my parents from their grandkids, mm-hmm. and things. Children at home don't have a choice. They're just stuck if the parents make that decision too soon. But as an adult, now you got to decide, what are you going to do about it? Do you even want to hassle that? Mm-hmm. And that's very disruptive. Mm-hmm. It happens a lot to people who get widowed, and the kids aren't happy about the new person moving in with mom or dad and disrupting the family babysitter, or and having to come to terms with, is the parent entitled to have a new relationship? Because that's a balance too, as for the adult children. Well, yes, they are, but I don't want to deal with it right now.
Mm-hmm. 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 Right, and the new significant other, oftentimes a very common refrain that we hear the parents saying, and the adult children reporting that the parents say, if the adult children say, I really would like it, just you to come, just be with me and my spouse and your grandchildren. And invariably, very often, the parent will say, well, why can't you just be happy for me? Which again is invalidating the adult children's feelings. They're entitled to not want to share you right now. You're with that new significant other the majority of the time. So why not respect, the biological family, we call it, and have quality time with them. And it's difficult for the significant other to be in that position too, it's very common. So these are a lot of the tips and topics that parents don't think of, and where the adult children feel caught because some of them are afraid to speak up, as we're doing, and identify the problem and saying, I'm not comfortable with this, and so forth. So that's, again, another reason that we're trying to educate the public and professionals, divorce professionals, doctors, nurses, because these adult children and their parents who are gray divorce parents divorcing, they're everywhere. It's the largest group that's divorcing. So in the industrialized world, we really need to be aware of this phenomenon.
Yeah, you speak in your book that the main audience is speaking to and about adult children of gray divorce. But you just mentioned, and I believe it to be true as well, that the audience for this book is so much wider than that. Myself, as a divorce professional reading the book, it is so important that I have this information so that I make sure that I can challenge my clients when they come to me and say, oh, no, our kids are older, they're good, there's no issues. And I can say, and I can bring up some of these things. I can encourage them to read the book and to have that dialogue. And maybe things are okay, but I can help to teach them how to identify when there are things that you may need some support for their adult children.
Exactly. Right.
There are
And
some
we have an entire chapter in the book that's dedicated to the parents of these are things you can do you may not have thought of that, and some of them we talked about here, and even estate planning. One of our colleagues who's an estate planning attorney as well as a divorce attorney contributed to that chapter to help parents. They might not even think that far ahead. And what about the family estate? Well, can you take care of things for your adult children so it doesn't put the siblings into a battle, which probate attorneys often see, of course. So there's a whole chapter in there. And we have woven it in throughout the book, tips for the parents, divorce professionals, clergy, anybody, community members, as well as the adult children. Bruce, you were starting to say something.
Yeah, Carol alluded to earlier the new person coming in and wanting to come in maybe too soon. And so now grandpa's not coming to Thanksgiving, or grandma's not going to come to your birthday party because we won't bring Joey or Ralph or whoever it is. And so then that caused a conflict between the adult children and the parent, a sense of loss. We're never can't get this person even to come over to the house just for my child's birthday. And then that's a conflict between the parents and the child trying to explain why grandma and grandma don't like each other anymore. Or it's not just that they don't live together, but they won't even come to my birthday party. And that's something that people don't think of ahead of time with that. They'll take it as personal. Well, and so part of it is the adult who's divorcing being able to have those kind of common sense conversations with their new love. It's not that I don't love you, but my kids aren't going to love you yet because they think you caused the divorce, or just the fact that they worry about mom that's going to be there. And so, something for them to keep in mind when they're choosing a new partner too. How mature is this person in terms of being able to understand how their presence may or may not be welcome in my family, not because you're a bad person, but the dynamics of a divorce make it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I love the parts in the book. You've got whole chapters dedicated to specific topics for adult children on how to help them to cope. And I'd love for us to finish off our book club today with your top 3 tips on how to help adult children of gray divorce to cope with the divorce.
So number 1, and then Bruce, you can do number 2, and maybe we'll do number 3 together.
Yeah.
Number 1 is boundaries. There's a chapter on boundaries and what are boundaries, and we don't probably have time to go into that here. But you have the right and you can learn how if you don't already know how to set healthy boundaries. But saying, I'm not comfortable, mom or dad, when you try to tell me what I'm feeling and thinking and experiencing is not valid. That would be an example of setting a boundary. Or if the parents are so antagonistic and it's going to be your college graduation, and if you ask them to promise you that they will be polite and not cause a scene at your graduation, and they're still so angry and hurt that your parents can't do that and promise you that, then it would be a hard boundary to set. But you could say, well, then either you sit very far away from each other, or I would prefer that you not come to my graduation because it's my day to celebrate, or my children's birthday if the adult children are older. So those are examples of setting boundaries, and we give a lot of examples and tips how to do that. Bruce?
Yeah, we also give tips on how the adult children can avoid getting drawn into their parents' conflict. For example, they can rehearse ahead of time. And the adult parent, the divorcing parents can help their children do this. If somebody comes and asks, well, here your parents are divorcing, or what's going on with your parents? The adult children should have permission to say, well, that's my parents' business. It's not my place to talk about it. But thanks for asking. They can be concerned, or if they know the parents well enough themselves, they can say the same thing. Well, they're working it out. It's not my place to talk about my parents, but you could go ask them. You know my parents. Go ask them yourself. But I appreciate you asking. And being prepared for those conversations can be helpful for the adult children, so they don't get drawn into it.
And I would say third is to tell the adult children that you aren't crazy, as some people have thought. Your feelings are valid. Just a month or so ago, I received an email from an adult child who had read the book. And this adult child said, for the first time ever, my parents have been divorced 5 years. I feel like someone's listening to me. So my feelings and experiences are real and valid. So that's a core tip. I think it's always a really important one.
And Stephanie, we've mentioned this before, but it's so important. I wanted to throw it in as a fourth tip anyways. It's really important for the parents to hear our words of not letting your children choose sides, and don't use them as your confidant. Because as you said, there is going to be resolution. And then what? You don't want more trouble to undo. And the first step, there's an old saying, the first step to getting out of a hole is to put down the shovel. And so people need to learn how to avoid picking up the shovel and making the hole deeper, because it's all going to have to be worked out later on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, Carol and Bruce, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce Book Club. We really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks again for having us, Stephanie, and we hope what we shared will help your viewers.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, and we will have a link to to purchase the book if you're interested, or to get some more information about the book and about both Bruce and Carol right below the video here. And thank you to our viewers so much for tuning in. And we encourage you to check out other episodes of our book club or our interview series. We've got ebooks, we've got courses for purchase, and we've got blogs here, all here in the Up a Notch Learning e-learning portal. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.